introductions. I just want to start with establishing quorum. So if you're a voting member today, either as the primary or the alternate for a primary who's not here, please raise your hand.
Yep.
16, we have a quorum. Thank you so much. All right, and then let's go ahead and start with introductions. I'm Andy Pease, I'm the new chair, and I don't know everybody's names quite as well yet, so if you could go slowly as you say your name, then I'll be able to learn people's names a little bit better. So, start over here. Sorry,
Harold Wright, Public Works.
Corey Howard, County Public Works.
Linda Seifert, representing District 3.
Sue Love, Environmental at Large.
Tim Walters, Development at Large.
Jim Gearing, District 4. Larry McGuire, District President.
I'm sorry, what was your first name?
Larry.
Barry McGuire.
Erin McGuire, South Sudan CSD.
Jason Yeager, Ag at Large.
Barbara Harmon, Recreation City Council.
Greg Graywall, 5th District Representative.
Dennis Laux, 1st District Representative.
Marcia Guthrie, City of Cushing Beach.
Michael Warman, City of San Luis Obispo staff.
Steve Sinton, Shannon San Juan.
Linda, Lincoln County
Sorry.
Ed
Okay,
Janine.
sorry, hold on. Lynn? Is that right?
Linda.
Linda.
on Kenny.
Ed E.B. Napomo CSD.
Craig Armstrong, Napomo CSD.
Bill Garfinkel, 2nd District.
Christine Mulholland, Environmental at Large, alternate.
Linda Chipping, Coastal San Luis RCD.
David Chipping, Environment at Large.
John Reed, Camp San Luis Obispo.
Eric Greening, Environmental at Large.
Ray Dienzo, Public Works.
So forgive me when I still forget, but I think you'll catch on. All right. And that takes us to minutes. We have 2 minutes for March and April. Are there any changes or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, we'll take a motion to approve.
I move both sets.
Eric to approve, and second. Linda Chipping. All in favor, please say aye.
Oops.
Can't do that. What are our rules on that?
And I just note that there is a longer account of the legal gathering later on, but this, as far as minutes, this doesn't.
Correct, and we were intentional about that in wanting the minutes, that the other ones are informal notes to kind of facilitate our discussion, but to have those notes be formal minutes could have a potential liability about representing what those folks said on the panel. So that's
So our support of it is in that vein.
Yes, excellent.
Typically on the first motion, it's kind of almost a roll call. Too.
Okay, terrific.
If
Good.
there aren't any changes, we can voice vote later. So.
Okay.
All right. Dennis Laux.
Yes.
Bill Garfinkel.
Here.
Linda Seifert.
Yes
This
is
is
to
to
March.
approve.
Yes is to March and sustain, and abstain.
Okay. Jim Gary.
Abstain.
Greg Graywall.
Yes.
Kurt Bollinger. Patrick Williams. Jason Yeager.
Yes.
Greg Nestor. Tim Walters.
Yes.
Sue Love.
Yes.
Eric Green.
Yes.
David Chipping. Yes. Linda Chipping.
Yes.
Michael Broadhurst or Tom Mora. John Neal or Jamie Hendrickson. John Reed.
Abstain.
George Kendall. Steve Sinton.
Yes.
Barbara Harmon.
Yes.
Debbie Peterson. Marcia Guthrie.
Yes.
Andy Peace.
Yes.
Craig Armstrong.
Yes.
James Cole's not here. Okay, I think that's it. Motion carries.
All right, thanks, everyone. All right, we'll go on to the updates, taking these one at a time to see if anybody has questions or comments. Rain and reservoir update, the report. Comments? Groundwater basin management efforts. Various county water programs, policies, and ordinances. Open reporting on water conservation opportunities and information. And,
Well,
oh, yeah,
so
sorry,
we're
go
getting
ahead.
towards the end. I wanted to make an announcement for, there's the Central Coast Blue ribbon cutting. I sent the WRAC membership an email about this. The mistake that I made, though, was that it is open to the public, but it is open to the public. I said in the email that it wasn't open to the public, but it is open to the public. But what they do want is, if you are going to attend, to give them an RSVP, just so that they would know parking issues, and I don't know, there might be food, I don't know. But yeah, they just wanted to get a head count just to see that, to be sure that they can accommodate everyone. But it's May 15th, 3:30 p.m., and it's over at the Pismo Beach wastewater treatment plant. The address is 550 Frady Lane. If you remember, there was a discussion by Ben Fine, did a presentation on this about the new initiative, the recycled water plant that they were going to do in Pismo Beach. And it looks like the pilot plant is going to be up and running. So y'all are invited to the ribbon cutting, May 15th, 3:30. And RSVP if you can, or if you can't, it's they just want to get head count, but you're still welcome to come.
Did everybody get that by email?
Yeah.
Yes. Excellent. Let's see, and then any other WRAC or Sigma?
Yeah, I noticed too that not everyone was signed up, so I went ahead and signed everyone up. That's why you guys got the email.
All right. We'll paperless one of these. Okay. So any other issues for those ongoing updates before we move on to the next item? Yes, Eric.
I note that yesterday, the County Board of Supervisors approved some new job classifications for environmental specialists 1, 2, and 3. And obviously, I would be interested in the upcoming agenda item to know whether that's accounted for in this anticipated, or if it affects it. But also, I would be interested to know, are they primarily going to be working in public works? And if so, are they going to be working at some points in the water division? And I know a question I had there that may not be relevant here is the requirement for a driver's license relative to ADA and people with disabilities such as low vision or epilepsy. Is this something that driving is essential for, or should that criterion be changed?
Anybody want to take that on?
Morning hours, I know it works.
Can you stand up?
Oh, sure. Unless someone was doing something I wasn't aware of, it wouldn't be in the Water Resources Division. I guess it's in the Environmental Division of Public Works. I know Kate's, the division manager, is working on restructuring her division, and I know new job specs and realignment was part of that. I can take back your question about the ADA. I'm not quite sure about that. So.
And so the resources of the environmental division are available to the water division when needed, but in other words, they wouldn't show up in the water division budget.
Not necessarily, only like integrated in a project where I gave them our project number when they were helping us with something specific, like SQL on cloud seeding or something like that.
Okay, so there might be a fund transfer when they're working for the water division. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. All right, so next item, review and discuss. That's where we are. Review and discuss the proposed San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District budget for 2018-2019 and consider actions. The recommendation is to receive a presentation from the public works staff and consider taking related actions. Take that.
All right, good to see everybody. Hope everyone's well. Back again for the budget. I see a lot of familiar faces, but just for the few new faces, I just have real quick slides to revisit the whole flood control district budgeting policy that we did a few years ago and how we're engaged. Oh, sorry. Okay, thanks. You can probably just go to the next. Sorry. Okay, so flood control district, there's some specific zones that have specific functions, and if you look at the end of the attachment that goes over the work programs, it briefly describes what each of those specific zones of benefit are and what they do. That's separate from our kind of flood control district, we'll call it general budget, which is about 2.7 million in revenue annually. In the past, for those of you who've been here a while, know that half of that budget was allocated to the Nacimiento project before it was fully allocated. And now with that source of revenue back, now that it's funded by the beneficiaries, we were able to actually establish the Water Resources Division and take on Sigma from the staff level. So we went to the board to update the flood control district's policy on just how to go about budgeting, just to kind of lay out the process every year so everyone can be aware of how we go about it. And that was included in your packet as well, just for refresher. So again, the priorities that we set up was first just flood control district regional services and commitments. That's things like the integrated regional water management program, our county-wide data collection program, mostly things like that, our regional resiliency planning, looking at the next Nacimiento project, so to speak. What are those infrastructure needs coming down the line to support or address existing deficiencies, resiliency in the future. So that's kind of the first priority of allocating the 2.7. Next, looking at the solvency of the district itself, if some of the zones of benefits are in trouble, trying to make sure that they're, maybe through loans, make sure they're solvent. So in that second tier, you'll see a lot of loans and paybacks coming in and out, and then also through our REM program, when we get grants, we have to contract with DOR directly and then pass it through to the recipients of the grant. So you'll see a lot of that pass-through going on in that second tier of priorities. And then if there's anything left, we can look at specific areas like technical studies in specific groundwater basins, or maybe the cash flow needed to get a infrastructure project going until the beneficiaries can start paying, things like that. So that's kind of the third tier of projects we look at when we're budgeting. So just the overall approach for the flood control district is developing a common understanding of conditions. So that's a lot of where the regional data collection and plans come in. What is that vision for sustainability? Making sure we're trying to integrate, look for integrated solutions across, ecosystems, water supply, water quality, flood control. So really trying to provide that framework, and then implementing the solutions. Again, that's getting the institutional structures set up, whether it's through a Prop 218, forming a zone of benefit, or helping with interagency agreements, cooperative agreements, helping to facilitate that startup effort, so that the beneficiaries can get up and running with those particular projects. We kind of divided our work efforts into various programs. We have the groundwater program, which is largely focused on helping implement SIGMA. Flood management stormwater, we have drainage studies and some specific efforts going on in different areas, but more importantly, we're developing a county-wide stormwater management plan through a grant. We've got just our overall management, facilitating the Water Resource Advisory Committee and making sure everyone's doing okay in their different programs. RWM, and regional resiliency, sort of that regional planning aspect, and then of course collecting all the data that we need to support those efforts. So that's kind of how we divided our work efforts up in using that budget. And then of course each one has their own, needs for special projects that they fund for. So I just wanted to share kind of how we're structured before diving into all the numbers that you see in here. And I can pull that up too. That's also in your packets. So basically, we have a 5-year plan, and I took that 5-year plan and basically put in the request. So if you look at, let's see, agenda item 4, attachment 1, page 19, that's that's sort of the meat of the specific efforts that we worked on throughout the year. And you'll see this is the 4th page. Sorry, I'm going out of order. One more page, sorry.
I have a question on page 19, starting up there with priority A. I'm looking at the projections, and I'm talking about the first 4, 5, 6 lines of desalination and cloud seeding feasibilities. And it's regional resiliency planning, I think is what it says. How do you expect to spend $50,000 a year on feasibility for desal, for instance, or Salinas Dam expansion? Are these ongoing studies that you expect to be working on and studying each year?
Yeah, it's sort of, for those being long-term initiatives, what I wanted to do is allocate some amount of money to make sure that we are able to keep it moving, because there's obviously going to take a long time to ever come to a decision on hitting the go button, and we're going to need a lot of investigation. For example, the next step with the desal side of things, Mladen had done kind of just a general collect everything we know about different desal opportunities in the county, and the next step we'd like to take is have someone kind of look at the regulations and the other needs in the county and start to prioritize, maybe develop some criteria for what might be the best site and what it would actually take. So kind of, just those incremental steps to also align with the other efforts. So as we're finishing our recycled water projects, as we're implementing robust conservation programs, how is that addressing our existing deficiencies and future needs? And if there's a shortfall, how could desal kind of fit into that? So I wanted to make sure there was just a recognition that we wanted to keep chipping away and keep that kind of on the radar when we move forward in terms of just that path for sustainability. And as we tick off some of these big high priority initiatives, just keeping a pulse on, okay, did that address the whole problem? And just kind of anticipating that it might not address the whole problem, and how does desal kind of fit in?
So these aren't
why.
So desal and cloud seeding and all are not approved in any way right now. There are no approvals for these. These are just to keep them on the table, in other words. So
Right. And-
continue to look at it.
Right. And whether it's 50 grand, I don't know for sure, but I wanted to have some level of budget in there just for flexibility going forward. And if we don't use it, it just rolls forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, on the Salinas Dam, obviously, there's the 19-foot gates that could be installed to expand the reservoir. There's a lot of question about the safety of the dam at that higher level. There are a lot of people downstream. There are a lot of environmental issues upstream in that riparian corridor. If out of the Sigma process, one of the Sigma-type entities, or as part of a plan for a basin, they sought to do a project that would benefit primarily the North County. And the last project that was on the table was primarily for the city of San Luis Obispo and was contested by entities in the North County. Obviously, there'd have to be renegotiation of the live stream agreements. The EIR on that project is stale. There would have to be a complete new environmental review effort, which would be quite expensive. Whose responsibility would that be if the project started out of a Sigma basin? Would it be for them to pull together the resources? Would the county somehow be, I know the county is offering a kind of steady cash flow to the Sigma basins, but obviously not sufficient for a huge project like that. Who would be responsible for what, and who would make the key decisions and approvals, and where would the money come from?
Yeah, you can see why I'm allocating some money over here. That's a good question, right? My answer right now would be, first we have to get it from ownership of the Army Corps of Engineers to a local entity. Let's say it's the flood control district, then it would probably be flood control district's project with the beneficiaries, contributing in an equitable fashion. But yeah, those are definitely key decisions in this whole process of when, getting ready for when if the time comes that needs to be one of the strategies implemented.
So the amounts in the next 3 years, are those for some specific function? Obviously, they're just placeholders, aren't they?
Yeah, they're placeholders.
And the absence in the out years, what is the significance of that?
Pardon me?
The absence in the out year, oh, wait a minute, that's the next line down, Salinas River Basin Study, sorry. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to, I've had to use this on this page here.
Trying to be transparent, but sometimes it gets small. Yeah.
You slide down on a little farther down on that page and see other projects and programs. Okay, so a couple of questions there. Paso Basin says here, governance, cost share contribution, beneficiaries, $500,000. So who are the beneficiaries who get $500,000?
So what I meant by that was, let's say, the GSA cooperative groups are moving forward on their plan, and maybe the consultant they hired didn't realize we didn't have a technical study to fill in that part of the GSP. It's like, oh, we need to fill in that part of the GSP, or else, we don't get a passing grade. I don't know what the cost of whatever that is. But this is how much we're willing to share, and I'm assuming the other GSAs would, match or come up with whatever equitable, share that is. So what I'm intending by that is just to note that it wouldn't be solely borne by the flood control district, that there's potential for beneficiaries to also chip in their fair share. That's what I
The
meant.
beneficiaries got shut down pretty badly. Then what happens out there though, when we don't do anything?
Well, this is the kind of goes back to the policy. As we're working on, let me go back. We have some part of the policy that we developed too allocated $3.1 million to have an emergency fund for true disaster emergencies. But we also have, after you account for that, some leftover reserves. And that happened because of water sales in the past, and Nosmiano also had kind of a chunk of reserve that came back from the flood control district. that's not an annual incoming, it's just part of our reserves that we can draw down over time for special projects like this. And so this is just demonstrating, if we were to spend that money in those basins, if we were to cost share on an emergency intertie, that particular reserve would be drawn down. And then we're getting closer to just that 2.7 million annual income. And so that gets more distributed up in priority A. So it's kind of demonstrating that over time, if we do a lot of Project C categories, if those really do come to fruition, then we'll be drawing down our reserves in such a way as we might not be able to continue to do that into the future.
So on Casa Basin, in order to balance it, we have to do something, but I don't see any funds actually doing anything.
Right. So a big part of developing the GSPs is how you're going to fund the implementation of the GSP. Yeah. Okay.
Could you explain governance under Block C? I notice there's funding for the SLO basin, nothing funded for the other basins. What exactly is governance, and why is it only one of them that's getting funded?
Yeah. Well, the other scenario is, aside from a technical study need to be done, is that the GSAs decide, yes, we need to do a Prop 218. Historically, Flood Control District has done Prop 218s to form zones of benefit. So that could be the other future need in that category, is helping with Prop 218s for zones of benefit if the GSAs decide that's the way they want to fund implementation. So that's what I mean by governance.
Is the totality of groundwater efforts wrapped up in the Sigma Basin, given that there are other basins and fractured rock areas of groundwater that also need attention?
Yeah, that's a consideration. We've been focusing on the high and medium priority basins, and the others are low and very low. So to the extent we use up our reserves, they may not be available in the future very quickly for the low and very low priority basins. We may, go back to the old way of doing one basin at a time as funding allows. So that is a consideration.
The proposition that's going to be on the June ballot, could that contain resources that might be used for such things in terms of applying for grants, both for non-Sigma basins and for fractured rock areas?
Yeah, I think there's some, I have to look more detail at the eligibility criteria, but I believe that's the intent, is any kind of water-related resiliency efforts.
It looked that way to me, but I didn't see it in hard, cold, beyond any doubt, unambiguous, so.
Yeah, they like you to compete, so you have to excel at it.
First, I would like to mention, great job on giving us this kind of detail, because in years past, we've talked about trying to get more detail on how these breakouts are working, so really appreciate it. I think it's super helpful to have this much detail, so kudos. The other comment I was going to make was that, I would be an advocate for trying to maintain that extra reserve over time somehow. I'm not sure what that mechanism is through court or whatever, but that special projects reserve, I think, is critical for getting things done that need to happen. So, good job.
Thank you. It's been made it easier for me too. It's been much easier going through our budget cycle, having a plan in place that I can turn to. So hopefully at year end we'll update it. This was based on our budget for this fiscal year, and if we don't spend everything in this budget, then we got to close the books, and we'll see, how this kind of changes based on what we actually spent this year. So that would affect that reserve amount too. Really, I kind of make it go to zero just to be conservative and say, okay, we got to watch this, So that 1 million right in this column, if we don't spend everything this fiscal year, probably go up, just to kind of highlight what that looks like over time.
Courtney, the money that came back to the budget because we no longer are paying for the Nasty Nine water,
and we paid for it out of the budget for 6 years. Is that funding ever gonna be replaced because they took the water?
No, I think,
So it's a giveaway?
yeah, that's kind of,
So they were the beneficiaries
that's what we do.
of the zone of benefit for that water, and we held it and paid for it for 6 years, and now they get it, and they don't have to pay back anything for their zone of benefit.
It's my understanding is that, kind of similar with state water, when people buy in, they don't, they only pay back to like 92, not to all the way back to 63. And that's part of what we've kind of laid out in this policy, is that we try to help it get up and running, and part of that is a cost share contribution. And some of those big projects, it's a big cost share contribution.
All right, do you need any action from us? Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Say to the board?
Support is always helpful. Don't feel obligated.
Is there interest from this body to make a recommendation to the board to adopt this budget? People feel comfortable doing that?
I think so, yes.
All right. All right, so the motion that we could entertain here is to support the proposed flood control and water conservation district fiscal year budget.
So moved.
Second. David, sorry, who seconded? Barbara? Carmen? We need, Tim was the motion and Barbara was the second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Perfect, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Courtney. Group appreciates having a clear layout on all of that. All right, so the next item is kind of the follow-up and discussion for the Water Law Forum. Show of hands, who was at the forum? Oh yeah, awesome, almost everyone. So what I'd like to do is break this up into kind of three sections for discussion. The one would just be first kind of overall impressions, logistics, how we felt about doing that. That was kind of a new effort for this body to do that. And then second part would be kind of content, things that you felt either new information or that you didn't agree with, or if you feel like the notes didn't accurately reflect, or any of those kind of content comments. And then the third would just be, do we have any action items that we want to move forward with? Do we want to, is there some summary that we want to get out to a larger audience? Is there something that needs follow-up discussion in a particular area, or any of those kinds of actions? So, so first part, any overall feedback, comments on that forum?
I really appreciated the recorded audio. I wasn't able to attend. We had staff members who were interested but weren't able to attend, so having that sent out afterwards was very helpful.
Excellent. I turned to Ray afterwards and said, "Oh, we should have recorded it." And he goes, "I did."
Yeah, great.
Excellent. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the committee that got this all done. It's never easy to put these things together, and I thought it was excellent.
Great. Yeah,
I
John.
wasn't able to attend, but I had like an assistant attend and my counterpart at Camp Roberts, and they thought it was very well done, and they were appreciative and said they learned a lot. So
Good.
kudos.
Good. Christine.
I was very appreciative that although there have been discussions on holding it in different areas, like the Vets Hall, I think that the board was an excellent venue for it. And I did hear from others who were there that they had learned a lot, so I think it had good value.
I wasn't able to attend, but I very much appreciate the summary, whoever put the summary together related to the bullet point questions. Ray, awesome job. Continue doing what you're doing. And then you indicated some kind of summary, if RAC wanted to send out some kind of summary. I guess the only question I would have of that is if these, the panel clearly stated that these were their opinions. So if something were to go out as more or less, well, maybe not an official document, but as a summary or a go-to, then that would be my only caution, that people might say that this is, you know, written in stone. I'll just say written in stone, and clearly it's predicated by law, but it was clearly their opinion in answering the questions. So that would be the only kind of caution.
Right, summaries are risky because they miss nuance and
Right.
Might not capture everything.
So that would be my only 2 cents, but
that's
I
what
don't really have an
so
opinion.
that's why I did show it. Other overall comments, Eric?
Following up on Barbara Harmon's comment, I was impressed that they did not pretend this was a legal consultation, and that where the answers needed to be ambiguous, they were very clear about where and how they were ambiguous. In other words, there are a lot of issues that are not settled. And of course, what happens in a courtroom is each side will cherry pick the case law that is advantageous to their side, and a judge will weigh what's in front of them. There are a lot of such decisions yet to be made, and I think one thing that was made very, very clear to us was that, especially when it comes to Sigma and its sort of ongoing, how it's going to play out, a lot of the case law is yet to be written, and a lot of decisions are yet to be made. So I think it was good that they showed that humility, and that they didn't pretend that this was a consultation and they were giving us advice.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, they were terrific speakers. David?
I thought it was excellent, but I want to make a slight correction. On page 30 of the minutes, the shortened statements.
So can you hold that thought for just a sec, David? Because we'll get into that in the kind of...
We're going to get into that.
Into the weeds of the content.
Okay.
We'll open that up right
They're
now. I just want to make sure...
not minutes.
I just want to make sure that we've captured anything on kind of the logistics, overall impressions, that type of thing. I do want to thank David for his role in gathering the questions. I think, and all of you for submitting questions. I think that was a really critical foundation to have that panel be really well prepared, and Linda did a great job of moderating. I thought also getting the word out. I mean, there must have been 100 people in there. I mean, it was hugely successful in that kind of as well.
Yeah, I would just echo what everybody said. I was blown away by the panel. They were really very articulate, well-spoken, seemed very knowledgeable. I mean, it was just awesome in my opinion. And, I think that sets a pretty high bar for us to try and follow up with other things in the future. But I'd love to see more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it kind of indicated the response made me think like, oh, this has been a need in the community to have that kind of expertise and education. So I think we identified a good spot. Yeah, Barbara.
Was there any kind of acknowledgement from the panel formally from RAC as like a thank you, or is that something that, I don't know, maybe can be considered? Hi, Laura, what did you think?
Linda, did you?
Linda,
I sent individual handwritten notes to each of them within a couple of days. I wonder if perhaps a formal thank you on RAC stationery would be good follow.
Yeah, that was kind of, as far as, and so appreciate you taking the time for the handwritten, because nobody does that anymore, and it's very powerful.
I'm such a fossil.
I wasn't meant like
It's
in
very
that
fast.
way. But I don't know if it makes it official, again, just throwing it out, whatever
Yeah,
the
I'd
group decides.
be happy to work with Ray, too.
To just, especially with the feedback, I wasn't able to attend, but if it was that meaningful and had that much value, that maybe putting a little more weight, with the formal, recognition, letterhead does have a little weight to it.
Yeah, and to, hey, we just had our feedback meeting.
Yeah.
I wanted to, let you know the appreciation. Yeah, thank you. I'll take point on that with Ray.
Thank you.
Any other overall comments or feedback? All right, now we can get into the weeds of content. If there's things that either were particularly compelling or just on notes that you think don't accurately reflect, I think that's fine to take those on just so that we have, even if it stays in an informal record. So David, did you have a comment there?
Yeah, it's a question about return flows and who owns them. That sentence is very confusing.
Page number?
On page 30.
Thank you.
And they weren't confusing in their answers, and they were straightforward. But basically, it's a sort of a plus and a minus. If you have a water right of a certain amount, and you kind of put it back in the ground, then that is on the plus column to your minus on your overall take. So I don't know how the statement needs to reflect that this other person taking it out that's involved in that question just complicates it.
So what are we?
There are a zillion definitions of return flow all over the internet and USGS, so I would suggest going to those so everyone fully knows what return flow is.
Okay, so right now it says return flow is when an agency imports water and puts it into the ground, then another agency pumps that water, which later returns to the basin. That water is still owned by the original agency. I
It
can see
isn't
that.
clear to me which agency is the original agency.
I don't
for
think it's a
example.
very clear statement.
You need to take out the second agency. It's just a question of one person owning and putting it back and having a bonus, if you like, on the basis of how much they put back. So the net is what counts, not the gross of outtake and input. So that's essentially it. But I'm sounding complicated. There are simple one-sentence definitions all over the USGS and other such places. So you can go to that.
Well, part of it too, David, is this was taken almost from the answer from the tape, like from the recording, and so
You did a wonderful job.
and it's true. We could. I try not to interpret too much of what was said, but I suppose for the sake of clarity, it's well noted.
But then my question would be on that statement, the return flow puts it into the ground, comma, then another agency pumps that water, which it, meaning the other agency later returns. Is that it more clarifying for us? Is it the same agency that pumps the water out, the middle statement, portion of the statement, and which returns it? That returns it, that agency returns the water to the basin? Is that what it's trying to say?
So so then another agency pumps that water and later returns the same water to the basin.
Yeah, or then another
like
agency pumps that water, which it later returns, just it later, meaning the other agency. Another agency, which it later returns to the basin.
Yeah, that's better.
May I suggest that you just simply say, puts it in the ground and retains ownership of that water? Just strike out the other agency, putting it back in the ground and retaining ownership, that's all.
Right,
Well,
although I think to
right.
Ray's point, he's trying to capture most closely what was said in that moment. And I think just adding that it and a comma was maybe clarifying enough. Anything that came out that was surprising or controversial or unsatisfying? Eric?
The notion toward the end that kind of the multiplier effect of the humility of not knowing what's coming, just the notion that the happenstance of who gets the first Sigma case to the California Supreme Court and what are the fundamentals of that case could be very determinative of what happens next and subsequently. That shook me to the core, that it could just be an accident of who gets there first that essentially sets the pattern for how Sigma law is interpreted in the future. I don't know to what extent I'm overstressing the shock value of that statement, and there probably will be all kinds of nuances and all kinds of cases that ultimately get there and somehow inflect the interpretation of other cases. But that to me was a very startling statement, and it's very much changed the way I look at fate.
The thing that struck me was that kind of the whole segment of discussion related to the power of the GSP and how it's going to interact with county policy and things like that. I thought that was really interesting. It's somewhat adds an additional layer onto the land use component of the general plan and possibly resource management. So it's just interesting. It'll be very interesting to see if there's any conflict or how that gets played out or how those agencies work with the county, and it's going to be complicated.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on content?
Well, I'm wondering if there's any interest in preserving this summary in some form on our website so it's available in the future.
Yeah, what do you guys think?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah,
That's
we could,
it.
yeah.
So I want to add, if we're going to do that, I think it's important to emphasize what the speaker said, which is this is just their thoughts and comments. It's not supposed to be a legal treatise. And so people can look at that and get a general grasp of the issues. But if we start to wordsmith what Ray found on the tape, I think we could do a lot of that, and that's probably not what we want. We just want to, this is what was said, and just to give somebody a little background information. If they really want to know what's going on, they can read the cases and read the textbooks.
Yeah, I think
I agree. As it says in the introduction, and all forum speakers stated similar disclaimers, saying their opinions are their own, but I think we need to blow that up a little bit more whenever we disseminate this information to anyone and share that. I think that needs to be upfront and centered. You have it after you've introduced the people here as it went on the introductions, but I think we need to emphasize their disclaimers that they were speaking on their own, with their own opinions,
right.
And there was no advice being offered. And I think that should be bolded and upfront if we disseminate this and share it.
Yeah, and I agree there, and I think we could even also go on a little further to say that these are the WRAC committee's informal notes based on that panel, rather than we're not sending them to them for approval. They're not their written comments. There are reflections.
Not verbatim or necessarily everything that was said, but this was our best take on it to help share the information.
Right. Well said. David and Linda.
I wonder if you might ask the room if there was anything that didn't get dealt with. For example, there's some big looming issues on how an SGA is going to allocate irrigation reductions and that sort of thing. Major issues facing all of the SGAs, all the basins. And we didn't get into those woods at all. It would seem to be incredibly valuable to have some sort of meeting where all the boards of the SGAs are there and talk about what methods they know of that would fairly implement irrigation regulation inside a basin. And that sort of deep discussion, there was no time for it, and it probably wasn't the place for it. But I think that there are some real critical issues like that need to be discussed. in a broad group with lots of opinions. So that's my 10 cents there.
So you're saying that, but it should be members of the SGAs that
Yeah, I would like
have
to
that?
see all the potential boards on the SGAs there, because they're the people who have to implement it.
Oh, to listen to it and then have experts?
Listen to it, to take part in it, to have ranchers, and, vineyard owners, all people who have a vested interest, say, in just this one issue, the irrigation issue, not the urban issue. But to talk about ways in which you would go about fairly allocating a reduction in pumpage over the entire basin. It would be good to put an airing of that, to find out what differences are, what the irreconcilable differences are, because there are going to be some. Well, I don't know, put that to the whole of WRAC, whether anyone thinks that's a good idea or not, but that's up to the chair.
Yeah, so ideas or responses to that one, Greg?
Well, I think.
Oh, sorry.
I think the first thing that you got to understand is that the basic thing is Sigma says it doesn't change any powers of rights that already land use owners have. And a farmer has the right to the beneficial use of that water at a higher priority than the city does to build another hotel.
But with a mandated reduction in use.
Why could there be a mandated reduction in use if it doesn't change current law? If current law says that you have the beneficial right and you don't own that molecule of water until you bring it to the earth, and once you bring it up, you can use it on your property, and you're not selling it or trading it or moving it, that's your right. Now, there's a correlative right that's written in the thing that says if there needs to be a reduction, it needs to be equal across the board. It still doesn't put the purveyors and appropriators to the first spot. They're still the second and third spot. And they need to understand that. And when they have secondary sources, in this case like Nacimiento or Salinas River or anything like that, they're required to follow the law, which means if there's no surplus, they need to reduce their use first until there is surplus. And if you just go by what the law is, you wouldn't have these arguments, but you have other people, while you go to courts, that decide they're not going to follow the law. They don't like the way the law is written, and they want a higher priority right to use the water. If you had 6,000 acre feet of Nacimiento water, but you're still pumping, and you're not using that 6,000 acre feet of Naci water, and you're letting it flow to Monterey to the ocean, is that wasteful? Is that best management practices?
That's why I want a meeting to discuss things like this.
Well, that's the city that's doing that, not the farmers that are out irrigating their crops that are making a living.
All right, so that's a lively topic.
How much of it is a legal topic and how much of it is a political topic?
Right, and how much is it specific to one GSA versus all of the GSAs? Each one is going to probably end up with some of their specifics. I missed a couple hands, so Linda and then Linda.
Just on the synopsis that you did, Ray, if it's going to be posted, maybe you could add a sentence which says the full audio is available and give the link to the full audio.
Yeah, no, I intended to.
Oh.
That was actually my intention of this was to help follow the audio because those are the questions that were asked, and so I intend to keep those together. So.
Yeah.
I was unable to attend, I was out of town. But one of the things in reading the notes that I didn't see much about was much discussion about governance. And it seems to me that I think in keeping with the comments from David about bringing some of the leadership team together from various Sigmas, that there's a place there to really talk about sort of common features of governance and what it means. Because I do think that in the end, it's governance and the process that's going to probably create more friction than even some of the issues about who takes how much water out of a groundwater basin. So to me, I do think that that's a critical area that may or may not have been addressed, but I don't see it, and might be a place where some follow-up discussion with even experts in that field might be appropriate for discussion. And my second question was, Could you give me the link? I didn't realize there was a link for it. What is the, am I the only one in the room
For
who
the
doesn't know the
audio?
audio link?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, so questions about governance?
I think governance is going to be ultimately key.
Sorry,
Hi,
Barbara.
next time I won't line myself up with. I guess the question of governance, I appreciate the question being brought up, but I guess to me, I can't reconcile the timing issue. If the governance is going to be, that's one of the things the state allowed, is that depending on your unique situation, what one governance might work, a model might work for one basin may have different characteristics of another basin. So each individual basin, unless I'm incorrect, my understanding was that they get to pick how they want to govern it, and therefore I'm not sure where the open discussion is about how we would formulate that in a WRAC forum, since it seems like there'll be a lot of differences unique based on the individual basin that's being looked at. So maybe it's a timing thing, and maybe the GSAs have to be formed first, and then we bring it in, as a future topic. So that, it sounds like it's a good topic, but I just don't know where it fits right now because they're still all being formed.
Do you want to respond?
My only comment would be that I agree with you that each of the individual GSAs will be able to create a governance system that works for them. But alternatively, they all function within the county. There are certain commonalities. And so to the extent that there can be a discussion about what they might have in common, or where they could find agreements, or they could help to work out, I think this is potential for some really difficult issues within any GSA. And so if there was a way to have a conversation about that I do think that is beneficial and valuable. But, again, I'm new here, and so if that's not how it's perceived,
That's a better explanation as far as the intent.
Yeah.
And what the intent would be on that basis.
Any other content comments? Maybe just for my own knowledge, who's directly here is kind of directly involved with a GSA, either on the board or alternate, or kind of part of the regular, who's like sitting on it, GSA? Okay. All right, so the rest are, I was trying to see if we had kind of enough heads in the room to really know who else.
Do you represent the city on the
I
local
do.
one? So, yeah.
I do, yeah, so I'm one.
And there's on North County, on the Paso Basin, there's 5 entities. Scott Dudfield is one of the entities for Heritage Ranch. The county has a representative. In the Cuyama Basin, the county has a representative. John Pashong sits on the board. Debbie Arnold is alternate.
Right, Adamville is on the same.
Right,
list.
there's one county representative at every one of these agencies. Compton's on the Cuyama Basin. So the input of the county is at every single one of these GSAs. We just had two so far outreach meetings at the Paso Basin. They're getting a grant for $1.5 million to help develop the GSP from Prop 1. They hired a company that's roughly going to charge 1.3 to do the work. Funny how that worked out. It's funny too that one of their big groups that they work for is the DWR. I found that interesting. We just had a legal forum at this last outreach meeting. They had an attorney that just happens to work in the Kern Valley area. So I don't know if she's part of the Kern Authority and who they represent over there. I'm trying to find that out. But they went over a lot of similar questions and stuff. She went over the legalities of SGMA and people's rights and different things like that. You know, in the beginning of this, when you look at the first page where the lawyer for the state made her comments about, you know, wasteful water not being used right, I found it amazing that the most wasteful use is the water that gets to run back to the ocean because the Prop 1 money isn't being used that we voted in 2014 currently to store more water. They're the biggest culprits. They're the culprits that don't deliver the state water that we pay for. But they never want to answer those questions. But like I said, we can get feedback from every different GSA, just from the county people that go there to those meetings.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I just can't let that stand, Ray. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I keep hearing this thing about water going to the ocean is water wasted, and I'm sorry, before people were here, creeks and all the other critters, the flora and the fauna that need water also were here. Creeks and rivers were created when water runs, and water has always run to the ocean, and we should realize that we need to share some of it with all those other critters, the other flora and fauna, that rivers and creeks need to run, and yes, some of the water is going to go to the ocean, and it's not wasted. That is nature's way, and we need to honor it.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question then. If you didn't have any of these reservoirs, if there wasn't a Norville, and there wasn't a San Luis Reservoir, and there wasn't any, what water would be stored when there is a drought for the rivers and fauna to come back? There would be none. The reason that there's water there year-round on a continual basis is because man built those dams to store the water when there was extra water, so there would be water there when there wasn't extra water.
All right, so one last
That's
rebuttal.
That's enough.
We're done?
That's
Okay.
enough.
All right. I honor that these conversations have to happen to a certain extent, so thank you for being able to engage in that in a controlled kind of way. All right, so any action items? So there have been a couple of suggestions potentially for future topics, irrigation, governance. We can just kind of, put the notes online and call it good for now. Does anybody propose, we could check in again in 6 months, see how our GSAs are doing, and see if there's feel like there's some new themes or questions that need attention. Does anybody feel like there's something that needs to move forward out of this, out of the legal forum?
So I'm not sure we settled on how it would be stored, so it's available in perpetuity, or is it one of the
Yeah, so it sounds like we're gonna put it online with,
including the audio?
Yeah, so yeah, it's already online, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it in another column so that it's available all the time, because the agenda part always changes, but there is another column that'll stay forever.
so we'll have it up at maybe a year, and then, things change after that, it becomes stale, but, so stay online, and both the notes and the full audio, the notes with the disclaimers. Okay? All right, all good, any last thoughts on that before we close that chapter? Thank you again to Linda and David and team and Ray for
Yes, it was
pulling all that together. All right, and then that brings us to our last item, which is future agenda items. Do you have any?
No, I think like a suggestion that you brought up actually to me, Andy, was about the possibility of having one of the wineries that are practicing good water conservation techniques, perhaps do a presentation here. I don't know if there's anyone. I'm looking at Jason right now. I know that you guys are practicing some really good water conservation stuff. So.
I'd be happy to do something like that.
Okay.
I noticed in our bylaws that there's a suggestion to have the have our different representatives provide an update to the WRAC as a whole, suggested annually. Members are encouraged to provide an update on water resource issues relevant to their group or agency at least once per year. So I guess I put that out there to see if, our developer at large or environmental at large, ag at large, if there's a particular issue that you want to share in kind of a bigger setting rather than necessarily jump in on whatever the topic du jour is, but that there's an opportunity to present or suggest somebody who could come in and say, hey, here's issues that we're dealing with right now. Anybody interested in
And
this?
it's good that you remind us of that. Several years back, we had short presentations up front kind of the agenda, not every time, but frequently, and such as the interesting program we had the other day or the other month from the regarding the new plant and wastewater treatment plant in Pismo, and that presentation. We had various people from different cities would volunteer, and that would be agendized. We kind of fell away from doing that on a regular basis, but I do remember that it was valuable to sometimes have those presentations, so it's good to at least remind us of that opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric.
Not to put anyone on the spot, but I think from time to time it can be very valuable to have the resource conservation districts remind us of all of the programs they have available. And I would just mention that while we kind of have direct scrutiny over the flood control and water conservation district budget, and while they do sort of the departmental budgets on Monday and sometimes slopping into Tuesday, every Wednesday when there's budget hearings, there's sort of the budget dust that gets scattered around after they do the big stuff, various nonprofits and Arts Obispo and so on. And always in that lineup is county contribution, which is fairly minimal but usually quite vital to the resource conservation districts. And I think it could be a good idea for us to get a better picture of what effect those contributions have, whether larger contributions would have a greater effect, and if so, what effect, and what would be the effect if those contributions didn't happen, because I think there's sort of a reciprocal flow here, but I think rarely do we sit down in one time and one place to look at the totality of what the RCDs offer us, and I think it's important information.
Thank you for that. Any other suggestions for future agenda items?
I will just say that the areas of interest, the bullet number 1, in-stream requirements for ecosystem species, reminds me that in the late 90s, the WRAC worked with Flugro on trying to develop a master water plan for the county. And the one major glaring water gap, data gap that was never filled and never figured out was environmental use. We looked at urban use and ag use and rural residential, suburban residential. We looked at all kinds of different water uses, but there was a consistent data gap of requirements for ecosystem species. And if we don't really have a report, we might at least have it on the agenda whereby the issue that we were just sort of touching upon might be open for a discussion. Not that there's any direction that we want to get to, because that data gap exists in that master water plan. But it might be good to have a little roundabout discussion about how much water there is and how we might need to be sharing it, if it's groundwater by the ag or how cities use it. I mean, it might be worth having a discussion, if not next month, eventually. I would like to bring that one back up.
Yeah, do you have, would there be a speaker or somebody that you?
That's what I said. I don't have any ideas of a program or anything. I think that we need to have it on the agenda, though, in order to have a discussion. If we want to just have a round table discussion, just to talk about it, and I saw a few heads nodding here, it might just be worth agendizing it as an open discussion. Just see where it goes, give it a little time, 10, 15 minutes, whatever.
Okay.
Have a little discussion.
All right.
Because it's obviously going to keep coming up, it's an interest here.
Yeah, I think it's, and that's why it might be helpful to have some outside person.
If you could come up with something like that to lead us off, that's fine, but my idea was to
Start with
an agenda,
discussion.
we could have a discussion of which we can't have right now because it's not agenda.
Terrific. David, then Eric, and then.
Well, it's more than pertinent because Sigmund says that taking away from the surface resources is an adverse effect that must be avoided. So expanding that discussion to its interaction with Sigmund is critical.
Okay. Eric?
I was going to,
You concur.
that was one of the issues I was going to raise. And then the other one is that depending on the outcome of the June election, there may be a bond issue that passes where some funds will be made available based on the nexus between watershed stewardship and both human and environmental water needs. And it may be, if that passes, that having an agenda item to educate us on what funds might be available to either fill those data gaps or do projects on the ground that help with various kinds of environmental restoration. But we can wait and see whether it passes and then pick up on it in the fall.
Right. Yeah. If we as a group identify as something that we want to have move forward. Yeah. Could make some sense. Linda.
A few years ago, through a planning grant that the county got for the Integrated Regional Watershed Management Program, the RCD put together a watershed study, and there was a little money left from that, and so we hired a consultant who did in fact do an in-stream flow requirements. They looked at a couple different streams in the county, and they actually gave us a presentation about 3 or 4 years ago. And in terms of follow-up on that, during the question and answer presentation, and it's addressed in the notes, there was a gentleman who raised the issue about in-stream flow requirements, and the panel did say that there are state laws in place, and that there is a requirement through SGMA that they need to consider in-stream flows. So this is all sort of, for us, coming together.
Yeah.
I would suggest that we talk to Salmon Enhancement because they're actively involved in determination, and they seem to have the greatest interest in it because of their steelhead programs.
Okay.
They would definitely have the resources to help with that.
Great. Thank you. Any other last comments on the agenda? Future agenda topics? All right. Thank you, everyone. And then finally, it's our opportunity for public comment for items not on the agenda. Eric?
Yeah, it's actually been a couple of months since we were hit with this sad news, but we haven't had the opportunity. And given that Ray Allen was such an incredibly vibrant part of our group for decades and such a powerful contributor both on a policy level and to our understanding, I just think it would be appropriate for us to offer a moment of silence in gratitude that he was among us and such a dedicated member of the WRAC for decades.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a moment of silence for Ray Allen. Thank you. Any other public comments? Yes.
Hi, I'm Patricia Wilmore, Pastoral Wine Country Alliance. This is actually a comment on one of the questions from the water law seminar. and it's listed here. It asks, can a GSA have pumpers on its governing board?
Sorry, what page are you on?
That is page 32. I can stand it, that makes it easier. And the answer is, it is possible for a private landowner to be appointed to a GSA. Some of us who listened to the audio thought it went a little bit stronger than that, and actually said, if you have a significant group of pumpers, which is not represented on the GSA, they should be. Well, we have a real challenge with the Paso Basin Cooperative Committee. Since the supervisors chose not to seat the Estrella Alcomar Creston Water District, a very significant group of pumpers are not represented on our cooperative committee. So I went to the information meeting and brought this up. I was asked to bring it up again at the cooperative committee meeting, which I did. And the answer was the same. The supervisors voted 3-2 that they would represent. That is not a sufficient answer. And so I'm bringing this up because I think others need to be aware that we have a cooperative committee functioning, representing the Paso Basin, that does not legitimately represent the major group of pumpers in that basin. And I pointed out, this isn't an attempt to do an end run around the fact that the supervisors did not seek the EPC. It's simply following up on what was stated there, and that is, you need to have that representation, particularly when you have a significant group of pumpers who are not represented. And so I just simply bring that up for your elucidation, whatever, for your knowledge base, and simply ask if anyone else wants to take up this cause. And it may come to a more serious challenge than this. I just want to make that known, that it is a real problem for us who are over the Paso Basin. Thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up, Patricia. If we don't have everybody in the room, and the biggest pumpers are now not in the room, or being excluded in the Paso Basin, we won't have a resolution that is similar. We have to have them as players. The Cascadero Basin put a non-voting ag member, non-voting rural resident member on there, so they at least within the attempt. But you now have the Paso Basin, you have the agricultural representation. They're by far the biggest pumpers. They are going to have cutbacks, and they have to be part of deciding how that's done. Otherwise, we'll just be going through the courts and have nothing resolved in our basin for decades.
Eric?
Yeah, a related concern that kind of dovetails with this. The county now, in terms of the weighted voting on the Paso Robles Basin, basically has a controlling vote such that other votes don't matter. And so that's a sort of another issue that needs to be addressed.
So, I'm sorry, say that again? That
The way the votes are weighted when they essentially did not share their vote weight with an entity that wanted to be participating. Essentially, my understanding is that as the votes now count, the county basically controls the governance. The other votes on the committee don't add up to half. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, I'll answer that.
Yeah.
So Scott Duffield from Heritage Ranch, for those of you who don't know me, that is correct. They have 64% of the vote, except for when it comes to actual approval of the GST itself. That takes 100% of the vote. Heritage Ranch, for example, 1% is what our vote is. So it doesn't mean a lot of Philippines during the decision-making process for each. For example, we'll be deciding on what some of the projects are that will go into the GST, and certain sections of the GST. Those are going to be items that are voted on. And the cooperative committee votes on several items during each meeting. And so there is a weighted percentage. The county has 64%, and so nothing really can pass unless the county votes yes. So.
I wonder, I know this is just public comment, but backing up to future agenda items, do we want to consider perhaps expressing a concern to the county about that very odd weighting of who makes decisions for the basin, and include some of the other issues that have come up during this comment period, and perhaps look at kind of crafting a response to a decision that left the county with that kind of control?
It's Greg and then Linda.
The county has 61% of the vote, and the county represents a major portion of the area. The representation of the group that didn't get accepted represented 6% of the area, and they were trying to get 29% of the vote. That was uneven. You don't put the coyote in front of the chicken coop. You don't take the biggest pumper and say, how are we going to cut the water? You have less than 200 people and 50% of them don't live there, and you want to put them in charge of the operation. The county represents, those people are voted in. They represent a larger number of the people that live in the rural area, and that's why that voting was there. You need 67% to pass anything. So the county can't pass anything on their own without getting cooperation from the city, or from the San Juan district, or from Heritage Ranch, or San Miguel, because there's 5 entities involved. You need 100% for the GSP, but you need 67% to move forward. So somebody has to cooperate with somebody else, the county or whoever, to get to that 67%. Even if the county was to get there with Heritage Ranch at San Miguel, they still wouldn't have 67%. The San Juan district and or the city of Paso Robles has to be on board with whatever they want to do, or it's not going to go forward.
So, we'll just take these last 2 comments, and then I think we can make a decision if we want to agendize this in the future as a discussion for potential action. It's obviously not strictly in our purview as a group, but we can be as advisory and make whatever suggestions, I believe, right?
Yeah. The only thing about this though is if we're talking about the EPC issue, then the board already voted on that. So I mean, they voted it down. So
It's a little broader though.
Okay.
Yeah,
if we're going broader, then yeah.
Yeah,
If
to
we're
make
trying
sure that there's representation for that there will be a successful outcome, et cetera. So, I would certainly be open if the group would like to agendize that in the future. Did you have a quick comment?
I'm actually smiling because this is exactly what I was talking about when I suggested that we needed a discussion about governance, because it is those individuals, those groups or organizations that will ultimately feel, or now already feel, unrepresented within the structure, is what's going to, I believe, be that first case to the California Supreme Court about what's going to happen and who has what sort of rights and duties and obligations. And so, not that there's a solution here to be made in SLO County that's going to have that kind of an impact. And I don't necessarily think that that we can solve the problem, but I never think that it hurts to have the discussion. And so, I think that this discussion in this room is really healthy. I don't know whether it goes anywhere. I personally would not be ready at this stage to suggest that there be any changes to what's been adopted by the county, or anybody else for that matter. But I do think that it's a discussion that I would like to hear more about from those people who feel disenfranchised in particular, and by those who had strong sentiments about why the system is the way that it was ultimately chosen to operate. And certainly, he who holds the purse strings is going to, in many ways, call the tune. And I suspect to some extent that's kind of how it is right now. And it may well be that ultimately the courts will choose to continue that, but I do think that there's voices that feel very unrepresented. And so, I do think that, at least as I understand what our role is, that we are a place where those people can have their voices heard. That's all. That's all too much.
James Green, I'm with the Stowe County Farm Bureau. Yeah, you know, representation is the big thing with government. You know, you have major pumpers that don't have any say or input on what is gonna ultimately happen with the basin. That's fundamentally, got some errors in it, that's the way it's gonna operate. You know, as far as a percentage of votes and all that, there's different ways you can do that. You don't have to do it by acre, you don't have to do it by, you know, volume of water pump. It's just, you know, there's various ways that the figures can be done, but nobody has an outright control.
All right,
So it's a
thank you, appreciate that. So, just kind of by a show of hands, straw poll, who would like to, see this, item agendized, at a future meeting? Okay, great, thanks, that's like 15, I'd call that the, majority. Is there anybody who would like to be on record, not, wanting to not have it? All right, so, I would certainly, appreciate some, after we close out the meeting, if you have thoughts on, how to conduct that conversation, or if there's other people that we want to be in here, if you could just approach us after the meeting and share your thoughts, so that we can put together a discussion that is, that moves forward in some way. Either it's a hearing or each other, or we do come to be able to make some kind of a comment toward that. Any other public comment that we haven't addressed yet?
Just one more real quick, not to complicate the subject any, but we are a GSA right now in the basin. However, we're pursuing a scientific external basin boundary modification to essentially exclude the Nosogano River Valley west of the Ripping or the Cologne Fault system, so, which would exclude us from Sigma, so somebody could have our 1%. Hopefully.
Could I just make one more comment? Oh, I was going to say on the notes about where the various basins are looking for the modifications, is there any way that we could just, in that, or just as they're asking for modification, we could have some sort of, mini explanation of what they're asking for, what the modification is, the proposed modification? And the notes? Yeah, it was in the very first part, I meant to ask that.
Yeah, we could provide a little something.
I
Yeah,
don't have any idea, it's just
yeah.
that they're asking for modification. Well, okay.
All right, yes, sir.
I just have one thing about the law forum, and the comments on it. If you're publishing them, I think it was mentioned, how to be very careful on what you have to say. I think going exactly by the tape is the safest way to do it, because if there's any editorial in there at all, you're gonna have some problems.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how different people hear? Obviously, we don't want a transcript, you might as well just, so there's something in between, but we do need to, and maybe we can go back and listen to the recording about that particular item Patricia brought up, just to make sure. Okay, thank you. All right, with that, meeting adjourned until next month.